Thanks for joining us tonight. We welcome friends and members who are attending right here in Seoul, as well as those who are joining us via Zoom. We're sincerely grateful to the Asia Development Foundation for its continued financial support. And we're also very thankful to our member Lee Chung-oh from TCS Tour Lab. She's standing in the back here. She's helping us with the venue for the lecture. So let's give her a big hand of applause. Thank you so much. Please be reminded that the lecture content does not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of the Royal Asiatic Society Korea. And tonight we have lecture number 1508, and we will be hearing from Jihoon Suk, who is no stranger to the RAS, as tonight he is giving his 4th RAS lecture. Jihoon is currently a PhD candidate at Yonsei University, where he also received his BA and MA degrees in modern Korean history. He's currently doing research on the colonial era cultural history of Korea, with a special focus on the presence and popularity of modern audiovisual media, such as sound recordings, film, and radio during the Japanese colonial era. He has published numerous articles and research papers in collaboration with various institutions, such as the National History Museum of Korea, the Seoul City History Museum, the Korean Archives, and the National Kugak Center. Today, Jihoon will talk about Hirayama Masazu, I hope I pronounced that correctly, a Japanese dairy operator, and he will also be talking about the history of the Donam-dong area, which was home to the dairy farm, as well as a massive Hanok complex. Donam-dong was also the home of longtime RAS member and former RAS president Peter Bartholomew, to whom Jihoon is dedicating this lecture tonight. So please give Jihoon a big round of applause.
Thank you. It has been an honor to be here, especially in this thank you for giving me this opportunity to give this tribute, heartfelt tribute to our beloved Peter. So I'm not, I really wish that, he could be here so that he could actually know the whole history surrounding his own Hanok, and as well as the entire surroundings of his neighborhood. But then, what I had uncovered is quite fascinating in its own right. Some might actually find it a little bit, far-fetched or stretched to have a direct connection to the man that we all, used to know. But don't worry about it. It'll come out. It'll come at the end of it. It'll all come together. So anyway, so we have a lot to unpack. So I actually wanted to extend a little bit of extra time, but no, apparently that was not allowed. So I'll just move on really quick. So before we actually move on, we really need to talk a lot about the Japanese settlers in colonial Korea, which is because the man, this person in question that we are going to talk about today, was one of them. So since the mid 1870s, a variety of Japanese people, especially with a different social status and backgrounds, began to settle in many different parts of Korea. And the biggest influx of Japanese immigrants or settlers in Korea happened within the 2 decades, the 1890s and about early 19-teens. So most of them had small businesses. Some became relatively wealthy, landowners, factory owners, corporate businessmen, while most remained lower middle class. The first 2 generations of these Japanese settlers did not really mingle with Koreans, while the 3rd generation or more or less had a bond with some Korean acquaintances. that being said, most Korean settlements, residential areas, like Japanese settlements in Korea, remained a ghetto-like environment until the end of the colonial rule. But then, of course, the man that we are going to discuss today, Hirayama Masazu, doesn't really fit into any of this. So that already made him quite special. So by 1945, at the end of the colonial rule, the total number of Japanese settlers living in Korea was roughly about 840,000, which was roughly about 3.5% of the entire population of Korea at the time. But 90% of the Japanese settlers returned back to their home country of Japan. This is kind of like a misnomer, and that's one of the reasons why I used quotation marks on it, because by this point, most of the people, like most of these Japanese settlers were like second, third generation people who actually was born and grew up in Korea. So anyway, they had to return back to their home country following the Japanese defeat in World War II, and of course, Korea being liberated in 1945. And one of the big things that that actually prompted me to do this particular lecture today is this sheer fact that most of their stories have been ignored or forgotten completely. And but there had been some resurgence of interest in some recent Korean scholarship lately, and so a lot of new scholars are shedding some new light on some of these more some of the more interesting examples that we could actually find some traces for. So, and this man, Hirayama Masazu, is definitely is one of the more interesting side. So let's get it going. So a little biographical information of this man. So he was born in Nagasaki on June 1st, 1880. And as the name suggests, he was baptized David, and because his family was a Kiristan household who maintained their Catholic faith for 7 generations since the mid-Edo period. Consequently, they also suffered from oppression from the Edo shogunate. His great uncle and aunt was persecuted and condemned to be executed in the 1850s. So there had been a very strong religiosity within his family at the time. His father, Hirayama Masayoshi, he also briefly tried to become a Catholic priest in his youth, but kind of lapsed and became a farmer and cattle rancher. And Hirayama Masayoshi himself, he attended Catholic school, Kaisei Catholic School in Nagasaki, which still exists, and he graduated from it in 1899 and studied in Tokyo Foreign Language School and majoring in English and French, graduating in March 1901. So clearly he had a knack for talent for foreign languages, as we will see. And in the meantime, interestingly, he also mastered judo. And so around the time of his graduation, he already mastered it. He was a judo master, and he frequently apparently joked about this to his family and friends, because his Christian name was David. So he always talked about the stories of David and Goliath to many of his friends. He married a girl next door named Masae, who was also from a Kiristan household, in April 1901, right after he graduated. And it just so happened that Masae's father, therefore his father-in-law, moved to Korea in 1896, operating a pawn shop in Seoul. And Hirayama's own father also had moved to Korea, settling in Seoul around 1897. And he also set up a farm with a small number of horses and cattle and 1 milk cow. And this eventually would turn everything, change everything in due course. So here are some 2 photos of the man. Most of them are newspaper photos, or the quality isn't that great. But anyway, you can see how he looked. And there's another photo of him. This is shot in a school in which he actually set up by himself, which we will talk about later. And this is the Catholic school that he studied in Nagasaki. It still stands, apparently. It's a high school now. And this is how it looked like the foreign language school had looked like around the time of his graduation in 1901. So here's a very interesting photos. This is one of those very few photographs that actually shows a fine detail of the Seoul area. It's not an aerial photo. It was simply just shot in Namsan, of course. But anyway, because we didn't have any high rises at the time, the view was really clear. This is actually an enlargement out of a huge panoramic photo that I have. So anyway, so you'll know, seasoned members of this organization would know that, of course, that big building out there is the Myeongdong Cathedral. But this section over here, see these little like grass knolls and things. This is the Hirayama Ranch. So this was right in the middle of Namsan, which is impossible to think that they had about like 40 horses in this area, but that's how it was. So I'll give you where it is now. It's probably somewhere between the Sejong Hotel, so close to Chungmuro, getting into Myeongdong, so it's probably around this area. So after getting married, Hirayama and his wife came to Korea. So he initially settled in Jaemulpo, Incheon, in May 1901. And he initially sought employment with Daechang, which was an imports good company owned by a group of Frenchmen, Loudon, Martin, and Plaisant. However, he had a clash with Martin. We don't know exactly what was it all about, but he was fired only after 3 weeks. He then moved to Seoul, decided to live with his father at the cattle farm near Namsan. And while he was working there with his father, he soon began to realize how Koreans and Japanese really wanted to consume milk. And he had given this interesting interview. So he says, back then I could sell a hop, which is 6 ounces of milk, for 8 sen, when one show, 4 pounds of rice was about 12 sen. So the poor Koreans thought that the Korean milk was a kind of elixir that would give them everlasting strength, health, and longevity, since it was only consumed by the royals back in those days. So yeah, this is basically how he started into the dairy business, and of course he would be extremely successful in that. But before that, he still had the idea of working with foreigners, particularly Westerners. So he actually traveled to Unsan again in North Pyongan province in early 1902. We do have some our members in our organization who, of course, has particular interest in gold mines and all these foreign ventures that were prevailing in northern side of the peninsula. But anyway, so he initially sought employment at Unsan Gold Mine Company, but apparently, according to him, neither the American managers nor the Korean workers trusted him at all. So he left his job after about 4 months and came back in Seoul. And on his way back to Seoul, he was attacked by a Korean bandit who was apparently armed with a gun. But he, because of his judo skills, he apparently managed to, counterattack this bandit and put him on trial. This incident actually tempted him to set up a judo academy in Seoul in May 1902, which was literally the very first judo academy to be set in Korea. And he then taught himself Korean language. In fact, he became so fluent that most Koreans who worked with him didn't even know that he was Japanese, apparently. He taught himself the Korean language and decided to focus on the dairy business altogether. And besides teaching judo and doing business with the dairy business, he also was a vehement anti-Russian activist. So he also set up a political organization called the Anti-Russian Comrade League in 1904, and he was quite influential in that organization as well. A conversation with Archbishop Gustav Charles-Marie Mutel, Vicar Apostle of Seoul, made him to seek more knowledge on the dairy product. As we'll see, Archbishop Mutel was a French priest. He was extremely influential in his of course, he was the de facto leader of Catholics in Korea at the time. Of course, he had personal connections with Hirayama. So as we'll see, this will become very important. So he, with the help of his Catholic friends and some letter of recommendation, Hirayama actually went to study dairy science in France in March 1906, leaving his father, his wife, and 2 children. He will ended up having 4 children, but we'll talk about that later. This is, of course, the photo of the Unsan gold mine. At the time, it was mostly just collecting gold dust in the bottom of the valley at the time. So these 2 photographs are quite. One photograph and one drawing is quite interesting. The first one, the left one, is actually from it's slightly much later, out of later date from Hirayama's own involvement. But then you'll see that, so you can see that there were quite a lot of people attending there to learn judo at the time, at the turn of the 20th century. And this picture on the right is quite interesting. So it's actually from a Japanese newspaper from 1903, in which they say that there was this like 5'6" tall Korean woman who beat the hell out of everyone, apparently, and like by mastering judo, and I don't know who this is, but apparently they made a scene, apparently. So it was widely circulated in Japanese press at the time about this person. But anyway, so on May 23rd, 1908, about 2 years into his study, Hirayama's father died suddenly of a stroke at the age of 55, and Hirayama was, of all places, Port Said, Egypt, joining a research project as a student at this French university that he was attending. I actually looked up what he was doing. He was trying to make like how to make the best dairy products out of goat milk, which was like quite prevailing in this side of the area, apparently. Anyway, so he only heard about the news in July, and he immediately abandoned his study and went back to Korea. So immediately taking over the family business, he began to heavily invest on the dairy business, selling off all the other animals in the ranch, and he bought tools and machinery to produce new types of dairy products, which also included ganraku, which is cheese, and he literally became the first cheese manufacturer in Korea. And by 1911, Hirayama's dairy farm was becoming quite successful. He now had about 100 milk cows, and producing 40 pints of milk every day, which made him the largest manufacturer of milk and dairy products in Korea at the time. He was also doing daily deliveries, which he was very proud of, to the Government General Terauchi Masadake and ex-emperors Gojong and Sunjong, and Government General Hospital, like all the patients there. So he was extremely proud of his achievement at this point. But only 2 years into that, in October 1913, however, the Seoul, the Keijo city government, the Japanese city government, set up this new city development plan, and of course, which of course included a total restructuring and redevelopment of the Namsan region. And of course, the ranch had to go. So Hirayama tried to stay in the area, but forcefully evicted in March 1914. So he had to start everything all back, all at once. So here is a little advertisement. It is probably the earliest advertisement I could find out of him, but it still says 대화정 이정목, which is Uchiro. So again, quite close to where we are. And he actually called himself a great monarch of milk, Uyudaewanggun, so which is also quite interesting. But anyway, so while the business was flourishing, but then he had lost everything, so he had to start back again. So in early 1914, Hirayama decided to, just before he was being evicted, he decided to purchase land in Donam-dong, which was a very small hamlet that was part of the county of Goyanggun. Originally, roughly, so the original size of this farm was roughly 2,500 pyong, which is about this much, but its size expanded tenfold by the early 1930s. So he became extremely successful in this regard. But the early years was quite challenging for him because he had lost quite a lot of his money fighting against the eviction, and of course resettling, purchasing land, and everything else. Between 1914 and 1918, he struggled to make the ends meet. So his properties, including almost all of his milk cows, were seized by the banks and loan sharks between August 1914 and March 1917. So he almost went to bankrupt, almost went out bankruptcy. But in March 1917, a Korean Catholic friend, he's not named in any of the sources, so I really wish I could know who this was, but he was clearly a Korean person. But anyway, he gave Hirayama some 7,000 yen, which is roughly about $2.3 million in today's money, to start anew. And clearly, Hirayama had a good reputation among his peers, apparently, and friends. And with this, and also other considerable amount of help from his Catholic friends, including, of course, the letter of recommendation from Archbishop Mutel, again, Hirayama's dairy farm flourished again. So with 150 Holstein milk cows in the early 1920s brought from a Trappist monastery in Hokkaido. So clearly quite a lot of Catholic connections going on still. Hirayama met and hired veterinarian and milk expert Matsuhara Shigeto, who was an ex-Trappist priest again, and who also brought new technology to produce other types of products. So coffee milk and cowfish. For those who actually go to Japan often, you will know what this is. It's a kind of a milky, like milkshake-ish, kind of like soda, and which is still being made. And he also dabbled in milk-based cosmetics, lotions, baby powders, and all kinds of different sidelines. So here's the map of how initially how the original area looked like around 1916. So you see there's a big plot of land down there, and you see the circle down there, which is the roughly how the ranch eventually settled in. And of course, by the mid-1930s, you can see that practically everywhere, every corner in this area became developed. Of course, we have some of the ranch facilities down in this side, but you'll see that how big this was by this point. And I tried to overlay this on a modern map. So this little square on one side is the original settlement that he bought in 1914. And by 1934, this had become this big. So almost 10 times big. And for those who actually know this area, you will know how big this is. See that little X mark, red X mark on there? That's where his home was. And you see that bluish star that I put, that's where Peter's house was. So you see how closely connected to this, and it'll become even more. So, and this is how it actually looked like. It's almost impossible to see this original terrain. It's kind of difficult to see, but there's a little bit of a mountain slope on even the further side of it. But it was a very hilly kind of an area. And much of this hill was literally just a cattle ranch, like with all these cows just like roaming about, yes. And so we can see some of the facilities down here and some of these buildings. And so we have some photos of his milk facility, milk extracting facilities, and all these factory stuff that he was doing. And for those who actually know about like cowpiss, don't know about cowpiss, it's this kind of product. You will see this modern version of it everywhere in Japan right now. But in the 1920s, this was around this type of thing. In the middle of it, it was also so it has a very interesting history of its own. But I don't have much time for that right now. But so his fortune really flourishes in the 1920s. So here he became the biggest manufacturer again in colonial Korea. And in fact, he was so big that he was actually the fourth biggest in the entirety of the Japanese empire at this point. Besides having a successful dairy business, he also began to go to other ventures, including a coal mining, farming, land developing, and a restaurant. In June 1926, he set up a restaurant called Koyoken, Goyanghon in Korean, which was supposedly the first restaurant to serve pasta in Korea. So he has a lot of first in Korea kind of thing going on with him. With ice cream and milkshakes personally prepared by himself every day. The restaurant also boasted having 2 French cooks who supposedly worked at the Tokyo Imperial Hotel before being lured by him to be hired here. And initially opened within the Government General Hospital campus, which was precursor of course, modern day SNU Medical School. Hirayama opened up 2 more branches, one for the Keijo Imperial University and one for the Government General Headquarters. Baron Saito Makoto, who was the Governor General of Korea, became quite a loyal customer to this establishment, apparently. His wife Masae took over the management of the restaurant chains in November 1927. But in the midst of all this, he still had second thoughts, as we'll see. So this is, so on the photo on the right, of course, it's his wife, Masae. And this building over here, which was one of the 3 restaurants that he operated on, this is the this was the second branch that he opened up in Keijo Imperial University. It was so it's in the middle of Daehangno, modern day. Of course, it's no longer there, but you see how successful this was. It was not a small establishment, and that's the some of the interior. Anyway, so he always claimed to be that he always wanted to do good in this world, and even in the early 1920s, when he was just coming out of his worst financial concerns, he was already doing quite a lot of philanthropic work. So it all began with the March 1919 independence movement protest. He actually vouched for safety of several Donam villagers who participated in the protest. He persuaded the police to release 40 Korean protesters without pushing charges, which is a very rare thing. And in August 1921, when there was another big flood that devastated the village of Donam, Hirayama personally rescued several Korean villagers by having a raft over there and literally rescuing people over within the waters. He also donated a substantial amount of money to 81 villagers who lost their home. But then it became even much more full swing when beginning in December 1920, the city government, by this point he became the city government kind of became a nemesis to him, apparently, because of course he was being evicted once. When the city government threatened to evict the beggars living in what they called the Chosan man-made hill areas in Cheonggyecheon. So this is basically leftover sand and dirt coming out of the all these construction work that was done in Cheonggyecheon in the 1700s. So they just didn't know where to deal with these dirt and sand. So they ended up putting all these things on a specific spot near Sindang, modern day Sindang. And so there were so this became home to many, many beggars and, people of, low social status. But then they wanted to evict these people so that they could develop the Sindang area for massive housing things. So Hirayama intervened in this and decided to build new villages to accommodate the beggars and the poor. So between 1920 and 1928, Hirayama built a total of 436 homes for the total of 1,579 people, and establishing 3 new settlements, including the one in Donam-dong, in various parts of Seoul. So all homes, by the way, had indoor plumbing and electricity because he was very concerned about the safety of these people. So this was all built with his own expense. And to give employment of these residents, not only he gave them homes, he also gave employment to these residents of these new settlements. So he set up a small bank. He also set up a vocational school, and he also set up a mail sorting office so that they could sort mails for the post office and make money out of it, and a factory that make tobacco packets and pipe holders. He didn't take any profits out of this at all. And he donated everything to charity, apparently, which is also a very rare thing to do. So this is one of the settlements from the newspaper. This is in Donam-dong. He had another one near Seongbuk-dong, and he had another one near Sindang. So 3 different settlements between 1920 and 1929. And all of these became quite successful. And here he is, very fuzzy photo again, but with a bunch of young kids who he set up the school. And of course, I showed you another photo earlier where he had met with all these Korean kids that he was supporting. And this is the photo of the mail sorting office that he set up around 1926. But then, out of all this, on January 19th, 1927, Hirayama's youngest son, Masaru, died of typhoid fever at the age of 19. He was studying to become a Catholic priest in a Jesuit monastery near Shanghai. I don't know why he didn't study in Japan, but that's how it was. But anyway, so he died, and Hirayama had his son's funeral at Myeongdong Cathedral on January 24th, which was officiated by no other than Archbishop Mutel. Again, he was very close to this person. Hirayama donated the condolence money, all of it, to Seoul Catholic Seminary in Yongsan, and they also set up a small pavilion apparently within the Yongsan seminary area. I tried to find the trace of it, but I couldn't find it. But anyway, that's what it says. Hirayama then donated all of his restaurants, gave up all of his restaurants to the government, and just gave rights, operational rights to these entities. And then he also sold much of his share of his dairy farm to his business partners, Masahura Shigeto, who I mentioned, ex-Trappist priest, and Kagawa Moriyuki, who was also a Catholic. So again, Catholic connections. With all the money that he cashed out from his dairy business, he embarked on his lifelong dream, which was producing a film about the struggles and martyrdom of Japanese Catholics, Kirstans, again, in the 16th century. And so thus began the 3-year production of Junkyo Keisei Nippon Nijuroku Seijin, which is the bloody history of the martyrdom of the 26 Japanese saints, aka the 26 Martyrs of Japan. So Hirayama contacted Nikkatsu, who was the biggest studio and distributor in Japan at the time. He served as the sole producer of the film. Wikipedia, the English Wikipedia says that he was one of the producers. It's not. He was the sole producer on this. He made sure that he had access to the best talents that money could buy. So he hired director Ikeda Tomiyasu, who was the leading director of Jidai-ryu films, period drama films at the time. Yamamoto Kaiichi, Yukasumi Masu, Fushimi Naoe, all of these people were top bill stars of the Nikkatsu roster, who ended up starring on these films. He also hired 2 famous historians to do research on the historical information so that everything that was depicted on the film is as accurate as could be. So filming began in November 1928. So most of the shots that were filmed in the historic locations near Nagasaki. So there's a coastline, there's an island, and there's the actual site. They actually shot it at the same site, the side of a slope where all these people were crucified. But there were some extra scenes, including some of the street scenes, and there's, as you're going to see, there's an earthquake scene, which is quite well done for its time. That was all shot in Donam-dong, at his farm, at his ranch, which is quite interesting. And initially, he said about the purpose of this film to be 3 things. They were to resolve the prevailing misunderstandings about the Catholics in our country. What he meant by that was, even in the 1920s and 30s, the public perceptions about the Catholics or Christians in general in Japan wasn't particularly positive. They were just being, when the Japanese country as a whole, became quite militaristic, they were still talking about peace most of the time. And that didn't jive well with the public sentiment at the time, but he wanted to change all that. And he also wanted to demonstrate how faith can make ordinary people to do great deeds. And he also wanted to show the power of perseverance of the Japanese people to the rest of the world, because apparently they could have this very strong, attachment to their faith. So they could do quite a lot of other things, apparently. So to include the finale of the film, it just so happened that in 1930, there was actually a real canonizing ceremony of the 26 Japanese martyrs at the Vatican. So he wanted to film that. So he actually traveled to Italy. He ended up meeting Pope Pius XI and Italian Premier Benito Mussolini, which is even crazy if you think about it. So here we have 2 photographs of him. So on the left, he is embarking on his journey. Believe it or not, he traveled all the way up. He didn't take a boat or ship. He took the train all the way down to Rome, which is, if you think about it, yeah, it was doable, but not something we can actually talk about these days. And on the right, these are the Japanese expats living in Rome who came out to greet him in Rome. And the next photo, I wish I had a better version. This is all I got, but here he is meeting with Mussolini in the middle. And it's very heavily watermarked. So apologies for that, but this is all I got. But anyway, so here is the poster on the left, and one of the scenes, climactic scenes, which I couldn't include due to time constraint. But So I'm going to show the movie, a little bit of that in 4 different clips. So this version is entirely of my own, which means I have a version. I have this like later edition that was made in the probably early 1950s. They added sound and music and narrations, and overall, it's in English. That's why I chose it. Some Catholic organization in the U.S. apparently had distribution right for this thing, and they did a re-edited version of it. So I have this reel. So I used this reel to create this little clip show, so to speak, so that you could basically get the gist of what it was all about. It has some issues, like there are some dropouts in the sound and whatnot, but this is the best I could do. So without further ado.
In the year 1593, the Spanish Franciscans, led by Father Peter Baptista, come to Japan to preach the gospel of Christ. Father Peter is royally entertained. He tells Hideyoshi, the military governor, about the great law of Christ. It is that men should love one another. Hideyoshi, who had fought many feudal wars, betraying and killing, regards this as a strange new doctrine. In the ancient capital of Kyoto, the cherry blossoms are in full bloom, and it is here that Father Baptista begins to preach. Brethren, we come to you from afar to tell you about the Christian way of life. God the Father made all men to be brothers. He sent his Son, Jesus Christ, to be our brother, and this Jesus loved us so much that he died willingly on a cross for the good of us all.
Yeah, so that's clip 1.
Hideyoshi is well acquainted with the good work Father Peter has been doing. Now, as he returns from the temple, he stops and greets the Franciscan. In the most charming manner, he says, "You work always for my people, but you do nothing for yourself. What can I do for you?" "Your Highness, would you allow us to build a temple to the God we serve?" And Hideyoshi not only gives tribute.
Sorry about the dropouts, but
October 4th, 1594 is a glorious day, the dedication of the first Christian church in Kyoto. Yaquin, an ambitious Buddhist priest, resents the intrusion of the Christians. Yaquin, realizing that his influence with Hideyoshi is being destroyed, conspires against Father Peter and his followers. The plan is to start a rumor that Father Peter is a Spanish spy, that he had come to conquer Japan without bloodshed. They would spread a rumor that after the people had become Christians, Spain would send its fleet to Japan and rule the nation. On July 12, 1596, a great disaster falls upon Kyoto. A large meteor striking nearby is followed by volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. The Franciscans and the Japanese one rest. Thousands died and thousands were injured. The churches turned into a hospital to care for them. Among the mortally injured is the robber who says, I have done much evil, but I have tried to make up for it,
In the
and yet I am
previous scene that I
afraid to
didn't
die.
include there, this robber attempted to rob this priest, but he let him go, and
be
he's
afraid,
dying,
my
and
son.
he gave them right
Tell
straight.
God you are sorry for all your evil deeds. Believe that Christ died for you and all sinners, and that he wants you to live with him in heaven. The robber believed. Father Peter baptized him, and he died in peace.
Yeah. Okay. Next one.
10 weeks after the earthquake, a Spanish trading ship, the San Felipe, bound from the Philippines to Spain, is blown by a typhoon on the shore of Japan. On board are 100 soldiers and 7 missioners, and also cannon for use against pirates. The Spaniards demand permission to put back to sea. But the Japanese governor insists upon holding the guns and soldiers until he tried whether the ship had intended to attack Japan. The angry captain shouts, if you seize our soldiers and guns, remember this. Spain has conquered all these countries. Japan is a small island, and Spain could subdue you with ease. Now, at last, Jack Queen and his fellow conspirators have a better case. Artfully, they tell Hideyoshi how the Spanish captain had threatened war, that it was all part of the same pattern. The missioners and the soldiers are finally coming together. What enrages Hideyoshi most is calling Japan a small country, one that could easily be crushed. And Hideyoshi says, you were right, Jack Queen. Now that Father Peter Baptista is part of a clever plan to make a raid upon our country. The Japanese authorities are determined to make an example of Father Peter Baptista and his close followers. They came from all walks of life, rich and poor, old and young. The officials ask one question: have you spread Christianity? To answer yes means one by one they acknowledge their complete willingness to die for Christ.
Okay. Final clip.
On a hill called Tateyama, a hill in the city of Nagasaki, the execution sentence is read. forgive them, for they know not what they do. Among those who came on this last day was a mother, the mother of young Anthony. She called to him, and he heard her, and he said, "Don't cry, my dearest mother, but rejoice. I shall ask God to bless you and bring you soon to heaven." May God bless those who are about to kill us. May the blood we shed win the blessing of God for this country. I commit my soul to thee. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, we give you our hearts and our souls. There is no other way to salvation but the way of God.
Yep. So apparently, the original film runs about 2 hours. The English digest runs about 40 minutes, and I had to squeeze everything down to 10. So there are a lot of things that I didn't include in here, but it's a fascinating film. As you can see, this is not just your ordinary low budget religious film. It's it's a top of the line production for its time. But so the filming of the 26 Martyrs was finished in March 1931, and the film was completed in September. And the general theatrical release, which of course included Korea as well, was in October 1931. And this was a moderate box office success in Japan because obviously with the production value and all these top of the line actors and actresses appeared on it. So it had a audience drawing factor in there. Hirayama later exported the film to the US, France, Italy, and other places, all out of his money. But the film was obviously not a commercial success. And a copy of the film was actually donated to the Vatican, and which is thought, and this particular print is thought to be the most complete version of the film in existence. And the last time this film was actually shown was with the Pope Francis himself in attendance in 2017. So clearly, and I wish I had access to that final version, to that complete version, but apparently it's just like circulating within the Catholic circle, so I had no access to it, unfortunately. But anyways, Hirayama, on the other hand, embarked on an international missionary journey to the world, ostensibly to lecture the history of the Japanese Christianity, but he also, along the way, demonstrated judo, of all things, to his audience. And he also engaged in public talks defending the Japanese military political actions in China and elsewhere at the time. So yeah, he really had to have a lot of answers when it comes to because this is in the early 1930s, Japan was in full military swing, invading China, doing all these wreak havoc of everywhere they went. But then, it did not really go on with the whole peace-loving Catholic. So he really had a lot to say, a lot to apologize. After 2 years of doing this, 2 years and 2 months to doing this, he came back to Korea in April 1934. And after coming back to Korea, he began to publish a lot of Catholic-related articles and pamphlets, most notably the Mansei Affair of 1919, and the Catholic Faith, which I'm going to discuss a little bit later on this about this book. It was originally written in 1920, but it was expanded and reprinted in 1935. He also, interestingly, accepted the honorary consul position for the Belgian consulate in Seoul. He also frequently joined and met up with the Belgian diplomats, and he also gathered information on European politics. This will become important later. So here's an article from the Hollywood Reporter, March 31st, 1932. Like Oriental Enterprise, it says, and of course he talks about this person, DM Hirayama, of course, our man, trying to sell this film, to American film market, which wasn't successful. There's a degree of just dismissing him in some kind of a crazy, person, which is, like, I don't know, maybe he was, but. Anyway, so that's just about it. And of course, this is like I said, this is something that I told you just now. In 2017, a full version of this film was screened at the Vatican with the presence of the Pope Francis. So again, it apparently still circulates among, in the Catholic circle, apparently. So let me talk a little bit about this book, this one of the publications he did. He published many of them, apparently, but we only have some of them. Sometimes they were just like so small in circulation, they just simply don't exist anymore, as with all these ephemeral stuffs are. But then there's this pamphlet which was quite successful, and it was apparently read quite a lot within the Japanese circle at the time. So I want to discuss a little bit about this. So Hirayama, in this pamphlet, The Mansei Affair of 1919 and the Catholic Faith, he argued that the annexation of Korea in 1910 was an obvious choice for the Japanese government, which he argued was inherently peace-loving and harmonizing. So that also, of course, according to him, coincides with the basic teachings of Catholicism. He also expressed his beliefs that Koreans are spiritual as religious as the average Japanese people, and criticizes the common misconceptions about Koreans by the Japanese folks, such as Koreans being lazy or dirty or primitive, etc. So in this sense, he's definitely taking a different take on the Korean affairs. But nevertheless, he's not obviously supporting Korean autonomy, Korean independence, or any of that. Instead, he goes on quite peculiarly in this, in his own way of, argument. So he admits that there might be some controversies on the Japanese policy assimilation of these two people, but he argues that it will ultimately lead to the prosperity of all Asians, Koreans, Japanese, and the others. And this, of course, predates a lot. The so-called Asian prosperity sphere argument that was in the 1940s. This is predating that for at least 10 years, or even considering the fact that the original was written in 1920, almost 20 years. So it's also quite interesting in this regard. Hirayama then brings up the teachings of Jesus, and he quotes the famous saying, "Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." Matthew 22 verses 21. By quoting this, he indicates that a good Catholic believer would not try to oppose or rebel against the secular government of Japan. So that's his argument. He also points out, interestingly, that there were no Catholic representatives among the 33 national representatives of Koreans in 1919, which he thought as the proof on why Catholicism is the ultimate key to harmonize the two races of people. So anyway, so that's his conclusion. So he doesn't actually say on how to harmonize people with Catholicism or whatever, but nevertheless, the book was quite phenomenal, quite well received. The book had two forewords by two government generals, Saito and Nugaki. So again, this could be an official endorsement as you can get. So clearly, this was well received. And also, it also had an afterword from the Vatican ambassador to Japan at the time. anyway, so again, quite a lot of things going on, and there are like some similar pamphlets and articles that he also wrote. He also a prolific writer on like some of these newspapers, Japanese newspapers at the time, and to a certain extent, he also made interviews to Koreans as well. It's pretty much the same. So even though he was very familiar, very friendly with the Koreans, he had no trouble whatsoever associating with them or like hanging out with them, so to speak. He still had this very patronizing and of course, you know, a person of his time, of course. So he obviously had that. So that gives you an idea of why he was doing all this, and of course, coming out of his faith and how his faith actually worked in his head. But then he doesn't actually stop there when it comes to like defending Japanese like policies, because he actually ended up becoming a spy. So in May 1936, some of the Mongolian nationalists revolted against the Chiang Kai-shek's and China, like nationalist China's rule of Inner Mongolia. And by what they actually tried to do at the time, they actually joined forces with the Japanese Kwantung army so that they could actually fight against the Chiang Kai-shek's army. And so they declared the autonomous rule of the area. So by 1939, the region became known as the Menjiang United Autonomous Government, or Monguko in Japanese, which was, again, just like Manchukuo was, a Japanese puppet state. And Hirayama, ostensibly as a Catholic missionary, embarked on a journey to Inner Mongolia region in this time, spending 18 months in Inner Mongolia, and even taking the role of spiritual advisor to the Prime Minister of Monguko. He then published a book titled A Survey of Catholic Churches in Menjiang in September 1939. The book, ostensibly a report on Catholic churches and mission works in Inner Mongolia, has extensive maps, geological surveys, information, and all kinds of other useful information appreciated by the Japanese army. In fact, the book was not publicly published until 1997. It was only circulated within the Japanese army officers, ostensibly as a Catholic book, during an initial printing run. So clearly he was doing, and if you read it, and the reprint, which came out in 1997, it still had to be censored out in certain aspects of it, because there are quite a lot of sensitive informations on it. So Hirayama then was awarded a special commemorative bronze cup by the Kwantung Army in April 1942 for his services. They don't even say what services he did, but it is quite clearly indicative that he was doing a lot of espionage work, ostensible espionage work for the Japanese at the time. So here is him at the age of 62, around the time that he received his cup, commemorative cup. So it's again in this interview. So, but then what was happening with all these dairy business at the time? So with the increasing population of the city causing the problems, here comes again, the city government decided to set up the new development plan again for a new residential zone. So after much consideration, the city decided to build a new residential area in the Donam-ri area in September 1936. Oh yeah, so they're coming again. They're getting in. So construction of infrastructure, roads, water supplies, electricity began in March 1937. And much of the Hirayama dairy farm was taken over by the city government. It was ostensibly sold, but judging from the deeds I actually went through, it was pretty much a steal. They pretty much seized it again. With last remaining property was taken up by the city in January 1939. And Hirayama then, because I guess his heart was elsewhere by this point completely, didn't really care much about this business anymore. He sold the last remaining assets related to his dairy business in May 1943. And by this point, he had lost much of his fortune by this point. I think much of his espionage work, the missionary work, was actually done out of his own expense. I don't think he was actually paid by the government, so he was a willing participant in that. Anyway, so what was left of it was given to the charity by this point. And Hirayama's dairy product ventures was consolidated into what they call Keijo Milk Consumer Association, Gyeongsang Uyu Panme Johab in 1941, which became the basis of today's Seoul milk. So anything that you see, like if you go any store whatsoever, and you will see a carton of Seoul Uyu down there, you know it's a sort of like a successor to Hirayama's venture. So after the liberation of Korea, we don't really know what was happening to him between 1943 to about 1945. Well, we just don't have much documentations in this period. We don't have newspapers to go with. The newspapers that by this point, because things were hard, by 1945, daily newspapers were like 1 page long. Like there was nothing much to report other than war reports, and that was just about it. So we don't really have time or space for anything to know anything about this particular time period. But anyway, so after the liberation, Hirayama and of course his family was forced basically to move back to Nagasaki. And it is a little bit conflicting because I have consulted multiple sources and they give 2 different dates on his on the date of his death, either 1948 or 1949. Oh, it's close by. I mean, it's close enough, but he didn't make it into 1950. Let's put it that way. But his grandson, interestingly, who was Peter Takahaki Hirayama, was the bishop of Diocese Oita, which of course includes Nagasaki, between 1969 to in 2000. So he always wanted to, Hirayama in his lifetime always insisted that somebody has to have, like, somebody in his family must become a priest. I think it didn't actually happen in his lifetime, but his grandson apparently did eventually. And of course, he became quite influential person within the Catholic hierarchies in Japan. Bishop Hirayama was very actively involved in Korea-related affairs, particularly in his help of building the memorial for the Korean victims of the Nagasaki atomic bombing. So he was the force behind that. He also played a role, minor role, not a big role, but played a role for sure, in rescuing Kim Dae-jung when Kim Dae-jung was kidnapped by this KCI agent in 1973. So again, the Korea connection continues on. So yeah, so this is the city map of 1936, where all the yellow areas that they marked on this map was about to be developed. And Donam-dong is marked in this way. So everything in this area will be completely shored off, completely demolished and rebuilt again. So again, that's basically what happened to the ranch. And so this is one of the last advertisements of the consolidated Keijo milk consumer like association. And it says the milk is for those who can read it, it says the gospel. Milk is the gospel to the city, the good citizens of Keijo. So again, there's still a degree of, his faith still going on. So, and of course, this is what you can see everywhere, which is basically like sort of an offshoot of this man, his legacy. And this is Bishop Hirayama, his grandson, who died last year, by the way. He died in November last year, so at the age of 99. So again, so he lived quite a long time. And one of the things that, of course, he did was to build this monument in Nagasaki. So, and he came to Korea quite frequently. There had been many reports, many newspaper accounts, and when they had a top Korea-Japan Catholic associations and ceremonies, he was always there. So again, the whole Korea connection just continued on. So the eastern side of the old Hirayama dairy farm was divided into 42 housing plots in November 1938. The largest plot, the site where the Hirayama's own house used to stand, was taken by the Missionary Society of St. Columban in 1949, where the Korean headquarters is still located. And for those, of course, who went to Peter's house, you will know exactly where I'm talking about. Father Brian Garrity, the Irish priest who purchased the property on behalf of the society and who later became the superior of St. Columban's, appears to have known Hirayama, or at least knew who he was. And the hillside just north of Hirayama's old house was divided into 8 different housing plots. The first 4 houses, all Hanoks, including Peter's Hanok, Peter's home, was registered and approved for use between September 14th and 15th of 1939, exactly 6 years before the birth of Peter Bartholomew. So I thought this was a very remarkable thing because basically Peter and his house shared the same birthday. So Peter Bartholomew's house, on the other hand, is located on the very site of a monument that Hirayama had built in 1927. I tried to find a photo of this monument. It is reported on various newspapers, but apparently it was a very small, made out of wood, kind of like very modest structure. So there's no photograph of it I could find. But anyway, it was commemorating 30 years of his dairy farm business, and also was dedicated to the memory of his father. So before that house was built on that site, there was this monument on the very site of that. So again, it really is a very interesting connection. So, and one of the Hanoks in the site, located just next to Peter Bartholomew's house, was recorded as one of the lodgings of the St. Columban Fathers in the 1950s and probably into the early 60s. So again, it really gives you an idea of how somehow all of these things come together and just connected to each other. Of course, with St. Columban's and all these different people, and because of the settlement that Hirayama set up in there, which of course was predominantly Catholic, because Hirayama was Catholic, and I don't think he was pushing his faith to the people he was helping, but I think because of the influence that he had over them, I think they eventually converted into Catholic. Most of the time. So the area is still predominantly Catholic. And of course, it has cathedrals and all these different Catholic presence in it. So again, all very connected together, so to speak. So here's a photo of the St. Columban's headquarters as it looked in the early 1960s. Probably when Peter moved in this area, it was probably looking like this at the time. And of course, it still exists, but of course, in a very different way. This is how it looked until a few years ago, but they remodeled it as they always do, and it kind of looks like this, which is kind of like, like eyesore to me. Lost much of the original integrity of it, but it's still there. So this is the spot. This is the plot where Hirayama's home was, and again, this is only like 80 meters down to Peter's place. So very closely connected. And of course, we have, if you go to Donam-dong, you have this big Catholic presence, which of course is shown with this beautiful stone-built Catholic church cathedral built in 1949, at the same year when the St. Columban's came in. So it's still there, beautiful building. And of course, you know where this is. This is Peter's home, as I saw it. And I think this is actually photo taken by Tom over there, I think. And of course, this is just my way of ending it. So, yeah, so that's it.
I have a question, Jihoon.
Yep.
Do you know the current status of Peter's home?
Not now. I don't really know. Last time I talked to Peter Underwood about it, he basically said, this was in January, and he basically said he had given up all hope. There were potential buyers that that approached him for what was going to do with it. Nothing went on. Every deal fell through. So I don't really know what happened. Any questions? Okay.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious how he was able to, Hirayama-san, to triangulate his faith, Catholicism, in the face of state Shintoism, which of course was an artificial regurgitation of Shintoism against Western faiths.
Mm-hmm.
Did he have any serious rubs with the Japanese authorities because of that? Probably not so much in the 40s, but maybe around 1910, 1920.
It's not explicitly stated, but I think he was. Well, let me put it this way. So quite a lot of like Japanese settlers, early Japanese settlers into Korea, they had a very different understanding and ideas or like associations with the Koreans. between 1910 to about 1925, most of these Japanese settlers just didn't go along well with the colonial authorities. They just don't like each other at all, especially for the fact that many of these, like government general officials, like officials and like employees, they were transplants from Japan, whereas you had this ongoing, like relatively flourishing, like Japanese settlers that have been living there for decades, but they were not listening to them at all. There had been always a clash of interest between the two, and of course, another big factor, of course, that, like I said, many of these settlers were lower middle class, just didn't go well with the elites that was working with the colonial government at the time. So yeah, Hirayama, I think, especially with the eviction and all these different ordeals that he had, personal ordeals they had to go with, I think he had a very ambivalent understanding. Like, I think he was a nationalist, like as a whole, but a very different type of nationalist. He just didn't like the colonial colonial rule or colonial authority. I mean, I think he felt much superior to that than for himself. But yeah, he didn't say anything explicit, but it is, I think there are implications where he just didn't get along with the authorities at the time. Anything else? Okay.
Thank you very much for your lecture. I enjoyed it a lot. It was a lecture about my neighborhood. I'm living very close from Korea, which is several hundred meters from the plot of the farm we were talking about. And many of my friends living in Hanshin apartment, which looks like located right on the plot of the farm. Am I correct? Because in the movie, on the scene of crucifixion, I saw some hills. So I guess this is the hill where it's Hanshin apartments.
Some of them were, I think, yeah.
But my question will be about how did the main character came to Italy by train in 1927? Did he cross Russia?
He took Trans-Siberian train, which took him, I think, 46 days. To get there. Yeah, he had to get special permits, and believe it or not, the Soviets and the Japanese were getting along pretty well at this in 1930. But he still needed a permit. So he got a permit from the government general, and got it, and got his passport, and just went along his way. Just took the train. I think he made a stop somewhere. Somewhere in Central Asia. I can't remember exactly, but anyway, so it took him 46 days to get there, but he did it. And I wish I could find the photo. Like, apparently there was a photo of him meeting the Pope. I couldn't find it. There are 6 photos of Hirayama meeting Mussolini. I included one of them, of course, but it was a big news. It was reported all over Japanese media at the time, because again, how many Japanese citizen, not only that, settler in Korea, had actually met the Pope. I mean, that's a big news. So, yeah.
I think you can get more documents on his travel from the archive in Moscow, because in 1927, Soviet Union had cancelled in Seoul, but it was attached to the main embassy in Tokyo. And all documents which are recorded, they were transferred to embassy in Tokyo. All this recording the kept in archives, especially for this time.
Yeah, I didn't have much time to include this, but he is mentioned in the information paper on the Russian side many times, because again, he was a vehemently anti-Russian throughout his life. He didn't like the Russians, be it imperialist Russians or communist Russians. He didn't like them at all. No, and when he was doing his mission in Mongjiang, the Russians was also there, was very suspicious about what he was doing. So he is mentioned in many of these papers, but yeah, I had no time for including all that. But again, yeah, this is definitely not the usual experience of a Japanese settler living in Korea at the turn of the 20th century. No, but he is quite remarkable, and the way that everything is connects together to our Peter, of course. Yeah, that's I think quite fascinating in its own way.
What happened to the Japanese after the war? They had 40,000 something people that mentioned.
So most of them,
like 9% leave, go back, or 8% or 100%. And was there any? How was the route? Was there like any retaliatory harassment?
there were quite a lot, yeah. Some of these people did go through a lot of hardships because, and yeah, quite a lot of Koreans were quite, like showing their animosity, of course, and frustration over everything. Some people were let go pretty easily, but I mean, it's always like case by case, of course. I mean, it really happens a lot in other situations, of course. But so, like I said, about 90% of Japanese settlers by this point, over 80% of them were born in Korea. So they didn't actually have a home to go back, but nevertheless, they had to. And I mean, it's not that they had explicit orders to go back, but then they had no other choice most of the time. The only so of course 90% means that 10% of them stay. So what happened with that? What's all about that 10%? It's mostly intermarriages, like intermarried couples, Japanese like spouses to Korean people. So there were, I mean, roughly out of that 10% that who stayed, roughly 80 to 90% of them were like married to Koreans, so had relations with Koreans, family relations with Koreans, so they stayed. The other 10% or so, they kind of stayed because they were like essential workers. They were railroad workers. They were like operators, factory operators. Communication operators, telegraph and things, and there were like archaeologists, scholars who still were deemed to be essential. They were allowed to stay for a few more years. Some eventually settled, others left before the beginning of the Korean War. But yeah, so we don't really talk much about the presence of Japanese, and there are simply no people left around here. To tell their stories, to tell their memories about. So until a few years ago, 10 years ago maybe, there was an internet presence of some of the older surviving members who grew up in Korea in their youth in the 1930s and 40s. Most of them had died out. I used to be part of the all these groups with Facebook groups, online chat groups and whatnot of all these ex-settler people, but the last one I know pretty much closed down in 2018 because there was no one that was still alive by this point. So yeah.
One specific question. What kind of specific job did he do to rescue to help the Kim Dae-jung to be rescued when she was kidnapped by KGA?
So he. No, so again, there was right after Kim Dae-jung was kidnapped, and of course he was on a boat. There has been an alliance of Catholics, who were pushing the Korean embassy who was pushing a complaint in Tokyo about Kim Dae-jung's safe well-being and safety, and so. Yeah, he was Catholic, and I don't know. Somebody close to him might have tipped him off. He definitely had a considerable amount of connections with Zainichi Catholics, and a lot of Zainichi Catholics. The largest group of Zainichi Catholics happened to be in Nagasaki, of course. So I think somebody might have tipped him off, that Kim Dae-jung is in trouble. So yeah, but Hirayama didn't really say much about it. Kim Dae-jung did meet him. He was Bishop Hirayama was one of the guests who was brought to his inauguration in 1998. So he was there, but both of them didn't really talk much about what exactly in the role that they actually played in this. So, but yeah, it's safe to say that he did something.
Oh. One last question.
Okay.
I was just saying, is there anyone online?
No.
Okay then, I'd like to ask you to make a comment about, it seems Hirayama, in a financial sense, very successful. Incredible sums of money you mentioned, making the movie, supporting the Catholic Church. What's the legacy of the family finances?
I don't think there's not much left. I think he basically let it all go away in his endeavors, especially the film. The film cost him like it said, like in the Hollywood Reporter article, it says $150,000 in 1932 money. So yeah, he spent a lot, and all these endeavors that he did, the Catholic stuff, and in Mongolia and everything else. I think, and when the property was seized and redeveloped, like I said, he didn't get compensated much. Like, didn't really get anything out of it. Almost like maybe 1% of the actual like assets of it. So I don't think he was like financial wise. I don't think his legacy is nowhere in this age, in the day and age. Yeah, so that's what I can tell you.
And you have the last question.
Okay.
I don't know if you know this or not. How many Koreans do you think saw this movie in 1931?
Roughly 6,000 people.
6,000.
It's not too bad, considering that it was only shown in 2 theaters. So, and it had a long run, about 3 months actually. So 6,000 people box office.
Specifically, its influence on Korean and Catholic narrative and their own persecution and Joseon period.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I was a little bit curious about that. There was a mention about this film, and apparently some Catholic schools, including Tongsong Godeunghakyo, which still is a Catholic school, which is in Daehangno, they actually went, like the entire like school went to see it. So clearly somebody was watching it, but then about the actual like influence coming out of that went to the heads of the Korean Catholics, I can't really tell you. There's not much a mention of it. I mean, people saw it. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.